listening to the weekly sermon podcast from Ridgecrest Baptist Church in Springfield, Missouri. To connect with us or learn more, visit us online at ridgecrestbaptist.org.
I would imagine, since I'm looking at a lot of people that are used to going to church and, people who are crazy enough to come on Wednesday night to hear me talk, I figure, you're gluttons for punishment. But I would imagine that many of you, because you love the Word, you're here to hear the Word and to grow in the Word. And so when I ask this question, I assume that most of you, if not all of you, will say, well, yeah. So the first question is, do you often think of God? Well, I would hope so, that you have God on your mind. But here's the second question, and it should get just as many yeses, but if we're honest, I wonder if the yeses would be quite as many. And here's the question: do you long to be in God's presence? How often do you think of God? I would hope that that's a regular thing, but how often are you longing for His presence? I think that for most of us, we do want that. We absolutely do. But we know that thinking about God and really feeling God present, two different things. Many days we say our prayers, we're in the Word, but we're dry. We don't necessarily feel the imminence, the absolute power of His presence. Now, I will tell you that over the years, there have been a few times where I feel like I brushed up close, where God's presence and His holiness felt so rich to me. Those are sweet moments, but one of the reasons why those are sweet moments is because I hate to say it, but it's rare. There aren't as many days where I can say I long for His presence, but how many days do I actually feel His presence? I think that Psalm 48 will help us to not just think about God, but maybe to long for His presence. That's what I want you to think about tonight. It's not just knowing about God, but longing to be in His presence. Now, as I read this passage to you tonight, words like citadel and fortress, if you noticed, there's a lot of imagery here. It sounds like castles and fortresses and military kinds of things, and it is. But I want you to realize that what we have here is, quite frankly, a metaphor for God. Zion is the focal point here, and as is often the case in the Old Testament, Zion is more than a city. It's more than the place where the temple is. It's more than the city of David. It really does represent the presence of God. It's a metaphor for God. Jerusalem was sort of like a throne of God. In the Hebrew mind, it was the place where heaven and earth seemed to almost touch. And what we see here is that the world kind of knows this. Now, I don't need to tell you that there's a war happening right now in Israel. And I think that when you are honest about the history of that part of the world, you'll see that there have been people fighting over those rocks and dust for thousands of years. And you have to ask, when you see it, and I haven't been there personally, but the pictures don't look great. Like when I see pictures of Hawaii, I say, I'd like to go there. Or Italy, man, it's beautiful, I can tell you. When I see pictures of the Holy Land, I think, West Texas. And this looks like a desert, you much there. But people have been fighting over that. Let me tell you why. Because even those who do not really believe in God can sense that there's just something about Jerusalem and Israel. God's hand, for whatever reason, has been over and around that area. And I think that the world knows that, even if they don't know how to articulate why they have so much energy aimed at that direction, at that particular place on the map in terms of geography. They may not be able to explain it in any logical, rational way. But I have a feeling that what it is it's a pushback not just against religion. It is in some way a push against God Himself. And I think that the human heart, when it's selfish, when we want what we want, we don't want God. In fact, it's not that we can just kind of live and let live when it comes to God. I think we see in the scriptures, as I was writing this morning in Psalm 53, the enemies of God are not quiet. They don't lay back. They don't just let God's people do their own thing. No, they attack, they fight, they destroy, they break down. Look at the Old Testament. It's filled with pictures like this. And look at the newspaper today. Well, does anybody look at newspapers anymore? Look at your phone. And look at the story. Somebody. All right, good deal. I used to get the newspaper. Now it's just all digital. But anyway, you see the pictures on your phone if you're looking at any news, and you see that those battles are still being fought. Psalm 48 speaks of the city of our God, the city of our great King. Verse 1. It's a powerful imagery of the city. Now, I want to just stop for a moment there, because I don't want you to get lost in the idea of God kind of putting his hand around a city, because God doesn't necessarily care about the city, like the buildings and the streets and the, all the things that you think of when you think of a city. In the Bible, I think when the idea of a city comes forward, it isn't about the city, it's about the people who live in the city. It's always about people. God loves people. Yeah, of course, he loves Jerusalem. There's something special about it, but there's something about the people. Cities are places where there are mass quantities of these things called human beings. My daughter now lives in one of those places where there are masses of human beings. Did you know Chicago, the greater Chicago area, has more than 9 million souls in it? And that's not downtown. That's the larger Chicago area. It's more than 9 million souls. Now, I grew up in the country, and I grew up in southern Illinois, and everything bad in the world came from the city, because I was raised in the country. So I was kind of taught that cities are bad, and that's where crime and bad things happen. That's true, but it's true because what you have is not just a collection of and a concentration of humanity. When you have a collection of and a concentration of humanity, you also have sin. So when I'm driving down Lakeshore Drive, which is, I think, one of the prettiest drives in America, and I'm driving north to go see my daughter, that's one of the ways I can go. And on my right is this beautiful lake, and I can go for miles, not just a mile, like in Kansas City or St. Louis. Those are small towns, and they're downtown areas. You blink and you miss them. I mean, they're not that big. They're really not. In Chicago, I can drive for 15, 20 minutes and see nothing but one after the other high-rise apartments filled with thousands of people, just as far as your eye can see up that coast. Now, let me just say this. It is imperative for us to understand that where people are, that means those are people who are made in the image of God. We need to not be afraid of the city. We need to be compassionate about the city. Anywhere there are people, we need to be all in to care for them. I grew up in a very rural area, and I love the quietness of the country. Jenny and I were able to spend some time with her parents. We always stay out at their farm. They have 50 acres, kind of in the middle of the nowhere. It's pretty nice. Beautiful rolling hills, creeks, and side-by-sides, and you can shoot things, and it's all fine, That to me is kind of what I grew up around. But the older I get, the more I realize is my bias has been sort of negative about the city. But when we read the scriptures, the city is not always put in a negative light, especially when we realize that our job is to reach people. Now, our city is no major metropolis, but do you realize how many hundreds of thousands of people call Springfield or Greater Springfield their home? I mean, when you look at the demographics, it's pretty amazing. There are near 1 million people, not quite, near 1 million people that when they need a major service of some sort, Springfield is their nearest large city. It's crazy. So we have much more people to reach than you might realize. Now, I'm mentioning all this because what we need to realize is, as we grow in our understanding of who God is, when we ponder in His presence, when we get close to God, we're going to have a mind that's more in tune and in sync with God. As our minds get more in tune and in sync with God, the more we are going to want to share the gospel with people and win people to Jesus. So let me just say this. If your evangelism is flagging, lagging, waning, diminishing, are you getting the point? If in any way you feel like you haven't had a desire to share the gospel, let me just say, I think that is one sign that you are not as near to God as you ought to be. Because when we are near to God, we have more of His thoughts. And I want to tell you this, and I hope you hear this. If you have a friend or a loved one that needs Jesus, I want you to know Jesus loves that person and longs for them to come to faith. And the closer you get to Jesus, you'll understand that. And the more you begin to let Him speak to you, you will realize that we can share the gospel and we can participate in these eternal things, and we are invited to do that. Some people have passing thoughts on God or think they know God, but when you actually encounter God, you're never the same again. You're either lost in fear or lost in love, and I believe in this room are people who have been lost in the love of God. And your fear of God is healthy in the sense that you have respect for God. But in this room, if we can grow in our love for God, that will help us grow in our love for people. Now, hear me. This is so important. I keep hearing the voices of Christians like me who have been around the church all of their lives. And what I hear more often than not, I'm sorry, but this is true, I hear people more and more negative about culture and about people's actions and attitudes. And I understand why. Again, I'm not blind to why. But let me just say, when you are bitter, when you are worked up and upset about the culture, your mind is not going to focus on the love that God has for you and the love God has for those lost people. You cannot, maybe you can, I can't be angry and agitated and full of love at the same time. My wife will tell you, she knows the difference between me agitated and me in a good mood and loving. You can't really do both of those well at the same time. And by the way, you never do agitation well. It never goes over well. But I just want to encourage you. Like when I'm talking about getting to know God, I know that sounds like it's very selfish and about you being in God's presence. No, listen, until you get in God's presence, you're not going to have any power in your witness. Until you love God like He loves you, you won't even begin to have the passion for people that we should have. Jerusalem is used by the author of Psalm 48 as a metaphor. The historical roots here could be the conquest of the Assyrians in 701. For some reason, at this particular junction in the Psalms, there's a lot of connections, perhaps with that very seminal event where the Assyrians come in and surround Jerusalem. I don't know. There's a couple reasons I think that might be the case, but more than anything, I just think this is metaphor poetry. This is pointing to the end of time more than like history itself. There's some weird things like the ships of Tarshish. What's that about? I don't know. I'll try to give you a couple ideas maybe. But the whole idea here is Psalm 48 is challenging us to draw in near to God and enjoy Him. And I hope you'll want to know more of God. So just three real basic things here tonight as we're going through. We're going to hit some high points here of this psalm. First, we need to see the God who is there. First, we need to see the God who is there. Seeing the God who is there. The God who is there, I want to be very clear, that's not my line. That's one of my favorite quotes from Francis Schaeffer. Francis Schaeffer was one of the great thinkers, great soul winners in the 70s and 80s, where I went and earned is the right word, my doctorate. It wasn't a mail order thing, actually. I had to write a book and all that stuff. But anyway, Francis Schaeffer had taught there. In fact, Francis Schaeffer, one of his disciples, was my primary dissertation reader. So I have a direct connection, at least so Francis Schaeffer is my grandfather? Anyway, so he was really good. He was really, really good to show how true science and true art point people to God. He liked to talk about seeing the God who is there. And I want you to realize that God is not an abstraction. He is there. Like, if you will open your eyes, you will see Him. So I started my day. What a strange day I've had. I started my day this morning seeing a 5-pound baby, premature, and I have to tell you, she is beautiful. And the baby has, I won't go into great detail, but she's going to have a stomach surgery and maybe a heart surgery in just the next couple of days. But what I saw this morning, I saw this precious, perfect little girl. I saw the fingerprint of God. It was such a beautiful thing. I could see God at work. And tonight in the ER, amidst tears and weeping, I saw Christian brothers and sisters holding up one another. And in a place where God seemed absent to most that would have walked by, he was there too. He was there at the beginning of life, and he was there at the end of life for another family. God is all around us. When our hearts are not right with God, God's presence doesn't bring us comfort. In fact, we are very uncomfortable. We get uncomfortable to the point that we won't even admit that he is there. God's holiness is something that when we feel it and we're not right with God, it's not something to trifle with. It really gets to us. I want you to know, if you think God is just some kind of like celestial grandfather who just gives you soda pop and a moon pie and says, it's okay, son, that's not who he is. He is the Heavenly Father, yes, but he is a God of righteousness and wrath against sin. When we are getting near to him, we will feel something different. We know that we are no longer in a situation where we are in control. Listen, the closer you get to God, hear this, the closer you get to God, the less you're in control. He is sovereign. He is powerful. And I want you to know, I think that's one of the big problems with Christians today. We think we can be good Christians and still be in control. We are in control at our jobs. We're in control of our homes. We're in control of our hobbies and the things we do. We want to be in control of everything. We want to be the boss. Let me tell you something. You're not the boss. God is sovereign. It's all his. And we need to understand that. And when we start to get close and we're acting up, we'll know it. God's holy light exposes the dark sins of our hearts. And it will show up. It will, you will feel that presence. I think that Psalm 48 is really pushing us to the end of time because it mentions kings and not a king. It really does feel like in my mind that the psalmist is seeing a picture of the end of time. And what he's seeing is that all throughout time and into those last days, all the mighty nations of the world are arrayed against Israel. So remember what I said about the ships of Tarshish? This makes no sense in 701 because the Assyrians didn't have a navy. But what we see is that throughout time, Israel is right there on the Mediterranean coast. And for centuries, during the medieval age, it was the Europeans that were coming through the Crusades and coming through Israel in that part of the world and taking it over and conquering it. But to this day, if those shipping lanes are controlled by people who are against Israel, well, Israel is going to constantly, armies and supplies come through there. So that's probably what it's talking about, just the fact that Israel is always surrounded, always kind of the underdog in a sense. God's people, I hate to tell you this. I mean, I know here in Springfield there's a lot of churches, a lot of Christians, a lot of banks, whatever. But we're still in the vast minority. The world is not majority Christian. Even though there are lots of churches and a lot of people who would demographically call themselves Christians, they're practical atheists. I was thinking on that again today when we were in Psalm 14. We'll revisit that theme in Psalm 53. Many people are practical atheists, which means that they may not say that they're atheists. They may not be like, vehemently against God. They just don't make any decisions as if God exists. They just do their own thing every day. Well, most people that are like that are going to get into a place where they no longer have any respect for God or fear for God. And so these men of power and influence, though, when God shows up, as we see there in verses 5 and 6, they're astounded, they're in panic, they take flight, they tremble as a woman in the anguish of labor. what we realize is that verses 4 through 7 show the negative aspects of seeing God, the God who is there. So hear this. If your heart is not right with God and God shows up, it's going to be tough. We want to see God, yes, but let me just say this. When we see God, he is going to, again, reveal the darkness in our hearts. But if you look at verse 8, we see an upside. As we have heard, so we have seen in the city of the Lord of hosts, in the city of our God, which God will establish forever. Here we see that those who have heard about God, those who have seen God at work in their lives, are not frightened by God, but they're comforted by his presence. And they know that he is there. They know that he is there to care for them. Let me just say to you all tonight that God has, I don't know each of your stories, but I think if we had time for you to testify, you would tell me that how God has been at work in your life. Many of you would have great testimonies of how God has been at work. But let me just ask you this. How much more is God at work around you? See, God is there. I want to challenge you. Are you hearing me as we start this new year? This is an important sermon for the start of a new year because I want you in 2024 to do a better job of seeing where God is. Do a better job. Be intentional about finding where God is, because he is working all around you. And if you'll open your eyes, you will see him, as I shared with you, whether it's in the birth of a baby or even the death of a son. You will be able to see God at work. So let's move on to the next point here. So we've talked about seeing the God who is there. Now let's talk about thinking on God. The kings of the world are described here in verses 9 through 11. Notice this. We have thought on your steadfast love, O God, in the midst of your temple. That's the good people. As your name, O God, so your praise reaches to the ends of the earth. Your right hand is filled with righteousness. Let Mount Zion be glad. Let the daughters of Judah rejoice because of your judgments. I want you to realize here that the people of God have thought on the steadfast love of God and have been with God in the midst of his temple. Those are the people who are able to overcome the challenges that we read about there from the Kings in verses 4 and following. Now I want you to notice this word thought. It's a past tense verb here. And what we need to realize is that thinking on God is not something that should just kind of pop in your mind in a moment. I think there needs to, again, be intentionality here. Now, just as a moment ago I said, I want you in this new year, I want you to look for where God is at work. Well, another thing that you have to do, if you're serious about seeing where God is at work, you need to be thinking on God. I want you in this new year to spend a little bit more time becoming a theologian. That's not just my job. If you are a Christ follower, you are a theologian. You do theology. Anytime someone asks you a question about church, about God, about ethics, and you answer with any kind of biblical knowledge, guess what you just became? A theologian. Now, the problem is, okay, so the good thing is you're all theologians. The bad thing is some of you aren't very good at it. Now, the only way to fix that is not to go to seminary. I got a great thing today in my email. Oh, by the way, I got in trouble today because I've got to clean my email. I have 42,286 emails I need to delete. So I got in trouble for that today. So I don't know. Is that a demerit? I get a demerit for that. So I guess I'm eating up too much of the Google hard drive. So that's hilarious. Anyway, and then I could only delete them 50 at a time, so I gave up. So I still have 42,000 emails. But nonetheless, thinking on God, what does that look like? Well, it means take your time in the Word seriously. Take some time. I know if you're like me, I've been studying the Bible for a long time. I have a pretty good grasp of ancient languages, all those things that I'm supposed to be able to do. And sometimes the Word is still very, very complicated for me on a first read. Like, what in the world is going on there? Like the ships of Tarshish. Whatever. What in the world? I mean, it's deep. But notice this. There are so many good resources out there. There are so many good books that break it down and can just feed your soul. I'm amazed at how often I'll be reading, and it won't be a complicated book. It'll just be a simple thought, and it'll revolutionize my thinking and my relationship with God. So it's not about being able to read systematic theologies, but thinking on God is being intentional about reading the Word and looking for, whether it's today podcasts, a lot of people do that. You can listen to books on tape. There are so many ways. You can listen to sermons online and go listen to some good sermons. All you're hearing is me. Go listen to some good sermons. There's all these wonderful resources out there you have today. Do you realize, like 400 years ago, let me just say that, 400 years ago, if we were in the 1600s roughly, if you had 10 books, you were a wealthy man. A wealthy person, a person with means, would have had 10 books. Almost no resources were available. A lot of what people had were in just very minimal ways, like pamphlets and shorter works, because the printing press really wasn't even started, or just was getting started 400 years ago. So books were very rare. You have all these resources. The church is more biblically illiterate today, and we have far more access to resources than we've ever had. This cannot continue. If we are serious about reaching people for Jesus and in his name, we need to be thinking. The idea of thought in verse 9 can mean to picture or formulate ideas in one's mind. Another way to view this is that to see thought as a reenactment of God's actions. So in our minds, the more we have the Word in our mind, the better we are able to express to people who God is. Sometimes I find that the best things happen when I have filled my heart with the Word enough. Whatever the situation is, there's always a verse. And if there's not just a verse, many times God will give me an analogy, a thought, a word picture that helps people understand what God is trying to teach us. We need to realize that our minds matter to God, and we need to do our best to employ our minds. So when we worship, it's important that you stay kind of tuned in. I had to get on to the second service. A handful of you guys were in the second service the other day, and we had some kids, and they were like, they weren't just taking pictures of the, that. They were like taking pictures of each other and, kind of acting up. So I kind of called them out. And not individually. I just said, generally. And let me just say this, and maybe this is something some of you need to hear tonight. Maybe some of you need to hear this tonight. So if you do not have the discipline to have your phone in front of you and not play on it while we're singing songs and hearing sermons, you need to do something very old-fashioned and buy yourself a Bible, and that's all you bring to church. We're having to raise teenagers again, and what we've learned is that that's something we're having to do, is to say, you do not get your phone. You have shown that you cannot be disciplined with it, so you're going to take an old-fashioned book, Bible, with you. So let me just say, you need to think on God. You're going to have to figure out what it is that keeps you from thinking on God and be disciplined enough to do the right thing. You need to be able to come into church and allow God to speak to you. And he's not going to speak to you if you're playing Candy Crush on your phone. Okay? I'm just telling you. I mean, if you're going to be here, and I know some people are here because they don't want to be here. Every Sunday, and I kind of know where they're at, there's some people who are at church, not because they want to, but because they're doing what the spouse wants them to do. And almost every time I see that, I know they're on their phone, and they are completely plugged out, tuned out. What can I do about that? But when I see people who are leaders in the church and been in church all their life doing that, that tells me we're in trouble. That we have lost our ability to focus on God for an hour a week. I want you to get that in your head. Are you telling me you can't separate yourself from that phone for 1 hour? And some people can't. If we're going to think on God, we got to get serious about it. And we have to. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just saying I'm worried about the church. Not just you, not just Ridgecrest. We don't read anymore. We don't think much anymore, and it shows. We're going to share the gospel some 8,400 times. That does not take multiple theological degrees, and it doesn't take a silver tongue. All it takes is intentionality and care. But when you start sharing your faith and loving people well, they will come to you and they will want to know more about God. Are you ready to share more about God? You're only going to be ready to share more about God if you've been thinking on God. So when I think about thinking about God, here's the thought. True love speaks love and then shows up. So we speak love that we've learned from thinking on God, but then we're present. So much of being a theologian is not having the words to say, but being there. Just like so many of our adult leaders over in the Student Center tonight are. They don't have words. What do you say? Do you know what to say? When you're talking to grieving kids who've lost a 13-year-old friend, what do you say? Because I don't know. And I wrote a dissertation on death. I don't know. I don't know what to say, but I know that being there, I know that listening well and caring for people. See, those who think like God, they will have a word to say at the right time when it's necessary. But most of the time, if we are thinking on God, we will know where we should be. We will know what people around us need the most. And many times, it isn't your words. They just need you to be filled with the Spirit and close to them. Thinking on God should lead to the praise of God. Verse 10, as your name, O God, so your praise reaches to the ends of the earth. His presence awakens praise in our heart. One more thing here as we think about this, as we skip down to verse 11. God's power not only defends his people, but extends his righteousness to all the corners of the world. And so, thinking on God. So we've talked about seeing the God who is there, and I've challenged you in this new year to look for where God is at work. Secondly, in the new year, I'm challenging you to think on God, to be a little more serious about growing in your understanding of who he is. And then finally, let's talk about knowing God. In verses 1 through 3, and verses 12 through 14, that's kind of our focus. One of my favorite books, in fact, I gave it away to several folks for Christmas, some family members and friends, J.I. Packer's famous book, Knowing God. It is a wonderful book, great, he's one of the great minds, theological minds of the last 100 years, but that book is very, very approachable. There's some really, you can get it at CPO over there. There's a bunch of used copies you can probably get for a couple of dollars. It might be the best few dollars you spend all year if you've not read that book. But what I love about the book is knowing God is not about having facts about God. Packer makes it clear. He uses the term knowing in the biblical sense of relationship. Knowing God is growing in relationship with God. Our goal as believers is not to simply know about God, but knowing him or to know him in a personal way. I want you to realize that your Christian faith, it isn't an abstraction. Instead, it is an interaction with God, the God who created us and sustains us. So here's the thing. Too many people, they look at their Bible study, their prayer, and all that as an abstraction. They kind of put God in this abstract category. But what I see the Scriptures calling us to do is to interact with God. That's how we know him. The focus of Psalm 48 is not Jerusalem. It is the Lord. Notice, great is our Lord. Great is the Lord. Verse 1, and greatly to be praised. See, this psalm, even though it speaks much about the city of God, it's really just about the greatness of God. And notice it speaks of, in verse 3, within her citadels, God has made himself known as a fortress. Well, once again, citadels, fortress, yes, but the whole idea here is that God has made himself known. We can see the God who is there. We can think on God, and we can know God because of his self-revelation. So notice this. God has made himself known. Today I was thinking a lot about what it means to grow in faith. And the truth is that you can't just want to do this in the flesh. The only way that you can really get to know God is when the Spirit of God gets a hold of you. When you start to allow God to have your heart. I want you to know that God has given us his revealed truth. We can see in the Word who he is and what he expects of us. He has made himself known. We just have to receive that. We can receive it by faith. God is our citadel, our fortress, our refuge, We need to experience that and then go tell people about that. The more we know of God, the more we think on God, the more we will be inclined to share God with others.
Thanks for listening. For additional resources, to learn more about us, or get connected, visit ridgecrestbaptist.org.